I think we went through a period where difference was extremely important to be asserted, but it also surfaced the complexities of how it's also a tool of separation, right? Depending on how politics of difference happens, it can have the opposite effect of what it is intended, and especially if it is co-opted by the market of diversity, then we are set against each other, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't help in the time where the market is crashing and modernity is falling apart.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out what we don't have time for anymore.
Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are scientists, politicians, academics, journalists, and activists. They explain the complexities of the energy, economic, political, and cultural crises we face today, revealing what's really going on and what they think needs to be done. These are the stories of the big picture. Go to planetcritical.com to learn more and subscribe. My guest this week is Vanessa Machado de Oliveira, author of the celebrated Hospicing Modernity, and she has a new offering coming later this year, Outgrowing Modernity. She's also the Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Victoria, the co-founder of Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, and the Te das Five Curas network of Indigenous communities in Brazil. Alongside all of that, she's also an educator, academic, and a lands rights activist. Many of you will probably already know Vanessa's work, in which she advocates for the palliative care of modernity, the system of human organization within which we live, and prenatal care for something emergent and relational, and something which heals the separation divide between human and nature. We touch on all of those themes and more in this very wide-ranging conversation, in which we discuss story, the use of story, the pitfalls of thinking of story as the one tool of activism we need to engage in, how story is created out of relationship with the environment, is founded in materiality, how we can find a new way of storying the world, one that moves beyond subject-object relationships to subject-subject relationships, the role of our body in doing that, and why all of this is actually really difficult. The challenges that people face confronting the collapse of modernity, the very understandable desire for security that we all feel, the different reactions, why we choose to dissociate or deny what is very clearly happening in the world around us, and the different frameworks and tools that we have at our disposal to actively compost, not just modernity, but our relationship to modernity. We discuss the feeling of needing to slow down in this time of crisis, of coming to the awareness that nobody has all of the answers, of recognizing that the strategies and tools that we used up until very recently are no longer applicable because the political world has shifted so dramatically. With Vanessa ending on an incredibly helpful framework for finding solid ground in all the chaos, which is to ask, first of all, when are we? Then where are we? And finally, what do we do at the end of the world as we know it? I hope you all enjoy the episode. If you do, please share it far and wide. And if you're loving the show, become a patron on Patreon or support Planet Critical with a paid subscription at planetcritical.com. By signing up, you'll get the Planet Critical newsletter inspired by each episode delivered straight to your inbox every week. You'll also have access to the wonderful Planet Critical community who are full of inspiring thoughts, ideas, critiques, and determination. The links are in the description box below. I'm so grateful to everyone who chooses to support the project. I'm a vehement believer in ad-free and open access content, so Planet Critical wouldn't exist without the direct support of the amazing community. Thank you so much to all of you who believe in Planet Critical and keep the project going every week. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining me on Planet Critical. It is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
I've been aware of your work for years, as I'm sure many of the listeners have been. And in fact, I have been hounded on regular occasions to get you on the show. So I just want to reiterate, I'm really pleased to be having this conversation with you today. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing how you answer this first question, which is, why is the world in crisis?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. That is very interesting because I as you know, I wrote this book, Hospicing Modernity, in 2021. And from 2021 to December 2024, people who invited me to interviews and podcasts, there would be a question that was very common, which was, what evidence do you have that the world is in crisis? And from January 2025, nobody asks this question anymore because it is more evident for people why the world. I don't know if it's the why, but that it is in crisis, basically, across the board in many different layers for many different demographics. So the buffers that protected certain demographics from the ongoing
Yeah.
perma crisis have been removed, and people who were protected before are not are not are no longer protected,
Yeah.
basically. So if I were to answer the question directly, I would say a quick answer would be because we are at the limits of an expired story. And it is a story that humanity as a species actually told itself, parts of it, not all of humanity, but a big chunk of it, told itself a story that it was separate from the rest of nature and that it was there to manage everything, that land was property, and that it needed to exploit the land and other bodies, including other human bodies, um, for a single story of progress, prosperity, what has come to be known as development and civilization. And in this story, this expropriation, exploitation, and the resulting dispossession, destitution, genocides, and ecocides were collateral damage, so that the extraction and exploitation would be able to happen indefinitely. However, what was erased in the story is the fact that we're actually in a finite planet. And as we overshoot the limits of the planet, we start to see the impossibility of carrying the story forward. We have too much evidence that everything is indeed uh, interdependent. And um, when we start to see climate collapse, the biodiversity apocalypse, and uh, then it becomes clearer. But also that what was promised as prosperity and well-being by the story of separation, exploitation, expropriation, and supremacy doesn't lead to the well-being that was promised, right? So we're miserable in our relationship with ourselves, with each other, with other species, with the planet itself. So that story doesn't hold currency anymore. And as with anything, like when stories are dying, and some people would want to put it on life support, and others want to give it palliative care. So in some ways, I think what we are seeing, for example, in the United States, is an unplugging of liberal modernity that was in life support. And it can also be seen as a last grasp of the old story of modernity, of control, of certainty, and of a form of masculinity that then kind of arrests authority to reinscribe order. However, I do believe that at this moment, this form of masculinity is also rewriting everything because it is already planning for a post climate collapse world, and therefore, and this is an analysis that is coming from Olivia Lazard. Um, so the grabbing and securing of strategic land. So the whole idea about Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal if you put it in this context, you see that there's a logic behind it, right? In terms of the lands that after the climate shifts, what lands are going to be strategic and also in the context of wars. But then there's also a technocratic and oligarch move associated with that, that is surfacing in a very specific way at this moment. And that there's also the possibility that this is a targeted move of the population, right, for the species. So at this moment, I think why it is in crisis, the why is because of mental models and stories and forms of relationship that are not that have reached their peak and are now expired and need to change. There are attempts to change that back. There are attempts to change that forward. There is destabilization coming. And in my work, if we meet this destabilization as a reckoning, we have the chance to transform it into a threshold or a portal for something else still undefined to emerge or to be born. Therefore, in my work, I talk about the need to hospice what's dying, which means not investing in its futurity while not trying to necessarily murder it, and at the same time offering prenatal care and support for the earthly birth of something else, currently undefined, without suffocating it with projections and idealizations, and recognizing that it could be potentially wiser, but that wisdom depends on us processing the lessons that the old can teach at this point. So it's potentially, but not necessarily wiser. And figuring out a way of being together in this moment of death and birth, uh, where our nervous systems don't go into complete dysregulation and dysfunction. So we have to expand our personal nervous system and then also understand that our nervous systems are entangled with the nervous systems of our communities and of the whole of humanity, but also of the modern human world. And this process of co and meta regulation is extremely important right now for us to meet the moment as the moment requires us to meet it.
Thank you so much for that. There's obviously so much in what you said, and I hugely agree with your analysis. And I know as well how helpful your work has been to people trying to make sense of what feels like either an inevitability or a chaotic mess, and also having to kind of, move between that tension in themselves and in their own bodies. The thing that I suppose I'm interested in picking into with you is the idea of even a story, right? Because I think that for a lot of people, a story kind of becomes almost this wash for what's going on, and the belief becomes we just need a better story. We just need to find another story,
No, I agree.
a new myth, and it's actually quite easy. Like whatever, there's the problem then isn't material. It's again kind of speaks to this like human narcissism of like I can fix everything in my brain. My brain is the best brain. And so I'm really interested in this the relationship between stories and environment, and how is it that our access to fossil fuels created a story of unlimited energy forever, because that was what it looked like. How was it that having access to land and having kind of the tools available as well as Homo sapien then created the capacity for barriers, and then created the story of separation and possession and ownership? How is it that the material difference between male and female bodies created also a politics of hierarchy and suppression, etc., etc.? And so what I'm really interested in as well at this moment is seeing how it related to what you're saying, the talk about the quote unquote transition to renewable energy, there doesn't seem a lot of pause to talk about, well, why? Why exactly do we want to continue powering this thing that doesn't really seem to be working for most of us? But then also, how are we making room for the idea that if we do start to use different forms of energy like solar and wind, how are they going to create a different story? It doesn't come from our head. It comes from us. Like what is going to emerge from that, or what is going to the possibilities that could emerge as well from having less energy available to us. And then the idea of being like the energy surplus doesn't come from an extraction from the earth, but comes from your wider community and people that you depend upon to help you create the things that you need or want. And I'm really interested in how do we give prenatal care to that story that is undoubtedly, I mean, it should already be emerging, because stories come from this relationship between the human mind and the body, the body in the world. But it's not really being given space to breathe. And it's almost as if, like, when that new story was on the horizon, also of like, oh, maybe it's China's turn to be the top dog. You know, look at the reaction of authoritarianism and, you know, the sort of snap back to fascism in the United States, and attempt to active land grabs, Ukraine, you know, the attempt to Greenland, Sudan, it's happening all over the world. Palestine, you know, it's like 20th century politics has come to bite us on the arse, you know, because something else was threatening. So how do we give prenatal care to a story that is fundamentally connected to a new environment, but is actually already being suffocated by the desperate attempt to keep cranking modernity forward?
I was not expecting to be expected to be placed in that inquiry, but I am so grateful that we went there, because you're absolutely right. Like the simplistic thing about let's just change the story is a huge problem, and maybe what needs to be born is a different way of storying as well, right? So instead of us understand, because there is a bias or a reflex or an imprint in modernity or in Western thinking, where reality can be reduced to language, to wording.
Yes.
So that's the wording of the world. And then you word things, and then you create this filter where you can only relate through what has been worded already, right? What is already fixed in the categories, and the genesis of this way of storying reality is this separation that humans are the only reasoning beings, and that they can categorize and describe and prescribe and engineer based on descriptions, prescriptions, in ordering and categorizing of the world. So this would be a subject object relationship with the world, where the subject is the one that can name and create meaning, and the object receives this meaning. So and of course there's a spectrum of of potential for subjectification and objectification, but we do this to people, right? As we in any hierarchy, and we do this to other species, we do this to the planet, and that's what makes it possible for us to see the body of the earth as a resource, or the bodies, because our bodies are also earth and land, and we see certain bodies as resource, and we see productivity as the purpose of the bodies that are resources. So all our social constructs for how the world works are now tied to a way of storying that defines subjects and objects in particular ways. And then what happens, I think, is that our theories of change, they kind of just replace objects and subjects, right? So one theory of change, for example, to challenge patriarchy would be feminism, and then you're playing the with the chess parts without changing the game of chess, right? So who represents what? So this birthing of something else could be another way of relating to reality and language, which would be one thing that Maori scholar Carol Mika talks about, instead of wording the world, we world the world, and we understand language very differently. But that means also that meaning making is not the central thing. It is the and meaning sense making is not just meaning making. So this sensual way of relating to the world opens up to the reasoning of the body, the reasoning of other
Yes.
bodies, of other intelligences that then co constitute or co create or co conjure um, another way of being in the world, not another way of knowing the world or another way of not just another story, another theory of change, but another possibility of being with the world.
Yeah.
Not of doing to the world, but of being with the world and the grief of the harm that has already been inflicted in this world. I know it becomes very philosophical very quickly. However, I need to say this. If we don't go there to this, to our relationship with reality and with storying, what's left for us in this old way of this way of storing the world as subject objects instead of subject subjects is just more of the same, right? Even when we talk about community, even when we talk about place basedness, even when we talk about a different possibility of existence, if the story has the same plot, we're back.
Yeah.
We're back to that. If we can't feel the pain of the land, if we can't feel the pain of the planet, if we can't feel the grief of driving species to extinction, if you can't feel the fear and the panic of really realizing that we are shooting our own foot and setting ourselves on a path of agonizing, premature human extinction, if you can feel that in your bones, then we are back to the same cognitive, intellectual plotting that, I mean, occupies so much of our daily activities, including in podcasts and books and workshops, right? But what I've seen over the 30 years trying to invite myself and others to move from subject object to subject subject orientation is that there is no incentive for you to process that beyond the level of cognition, right? So you might agree it's a good idea. It would be a great idea if we could be with the world, feeling its joy and its pain, although some people say it's not a good idea because it's a lot of pain and they're afraid of pain. But even if you agree, like it's a good thing to do, neurobiologically, we are not set up anymore to do that. Um, Although the possibility of the neural pathways in a different neurophysical and neurobiological cocktail or configuration is still there. It's been just exiled because of our systems of education and socialization, right? But it's there. We are capable of feeling well-being in ways that we can't imagine right now. The proof of it is that communities that live a much closer relationship with their ecology or embedded in their ecology, like indigenous people, have ways of feeling well that are very different from ours and that don't necessarily exclude pain, right? So it's an expanded configuration of being, I guess, and a much more expansive nervous system also to deal with colonialism, which is what they have to deal with every day, and for they have been dealing with for a long time. So collapse for them is ongoing. It's just
Yeah.
collapse as we imagine it now is for those who had been buffered from it before, right? And it's interesting in my work too, like trying to bring the awareness of unsustainability and potential widening of collapse to those who have been buffered from it. It's interesting when I introduce it to people there's generally two types of responses. One is panic, and then strategy. Let me just protect whoever I love, right? And figure something out. The other response is dissociation. Like, let's just pretend you didn't say that, and let's just plan as if things were going to continue. And I've been observing this and trying to say, okay, what can I say that will preemptively make those two responses more difficult? Like, how do I? And I found one way, which is interesting. I say, okay, you want to plan for like for continuity. That's good. We can spend some time doing that. But let's also have three other scenarios, right? So there's continuity, or two other scenarios. The second scenario is we are 2 years from major destabilization. And then the third scenario, we are months or weeks from major destabilization. And let's just observe what would change in what your priority is in each of these scenarios. And the rationale for that is that we don't know, number one, when and how this is going to hit. And it's interesting here too that most people before January would, when I talked about collapse, they would think about collapse as lack of access to something. They would I didn't see anybody imagining that it would be the state orchestrating it. Nobody saw it coming, apart from probably those who had seen it before. Like there were people who saw it, but not in North America. So there's that. That was interesting. But the rationale for planning for this other possibilities is that in our nervous system, if it hits, if the moment of destabilization in your context, when the water reaches your bum, when it hits, and if you're not prepared for, or if you don't know, I've never thought about it, what happens is that you will tend to scapegoat and respond in ways that are not going to be effective, and you won't be able to coordinate. So what I generally say now is that we need to feel all the feelings that will emerge as we think about those things, and try to strategically prioritize. Because when it actually arrives for us, it's not going to be what we planned for, but it also will have an effect in your emotional state and nervous system that if you haven't done some of the work of processing some of these feelings, you will not be able to coordinate, and you will be much more prone to turn on other people. So you turn on each other, right? So educationally, there is a responsibility to bring people to the catastrophic thinkers that we all have in our minds, to work with them a little bit and get to the point where facing the end of the world as we know it is not as desperation inducing as it would be if we didn't see it coming.
I think that's incredibly important work. It sounds a little bit like trauma therapy or exposure therapy, when you just kind of, you go up to it and you see, okay, I don't have control over this thing, but if I could begin to feel into it, as you say, when it happens, maybe I'll feel more in myself as well, because there's so many different parts of us as well, aren't they? They're all sort of trying to grab onto the steering wheel and want different things, and we're not just this homogeneous block of consciousness going through the world. Something that's really helped me with this, something that I'm writing about at the moment for my book, and which you speak to, is this idea of embodiment, being in the body, entangled nervous systems, and that there is a way of making sense of the world literally with your senses. That the mind is not some kind of
the body is not just a meat sack for carrying the mind. It is the body that is actually sort of navigating and building relationships and interpreting what is happening. And then our mind tries to kind of either ignore, dissociate, control what, or accept. If you're a very peaceful, wise person, accept what's going on. And I found as well that playing with language, and the readers of my newsletter will know this, like playing with language to reveal that the clues are already there. Like we make sense of things. We find common ground. We get a grip on something. Like all of this language that is about actually confronting difficult things, but things that are real, is grounded in the body. Absolutely comes through the body first. And I think for so many people, when they consider confronting what is happening and what the future might look like, they're still doing it. And of course, right? But from this quite libertarian mindset of it's me versus the world, or I am going to experience all of this by myself. Whereas when you try to feel into the pain of others, the reality of other bodies, you're kind of gaining agency, because it's like you're sort of holding hands as well. You're creating a network, and not just in a sort of human way of creating like a mutual aid network, but literally a network of feeling into and being able to kind of interpret the signs and being very much in the world. Because if you're not in the world, if your head is in the clouds, or you're just you're not going to be able to do anything. Actually, you're literally existing in a fantasy, in a matrix of your own making. Whereas if you start to get back into your body and then into the body of all other beings around you, you are taking the necessary first step that isn't just about conditioning you to be able to confront things, but to actually be able to act.
Agreed. Agreed. And I hadn't thought about it in this way that you're describing. The invitation for subjectifying yourself as an embodied being, as a precondition of the subjectivity, the subjectifying of everything else. My daughter, Giovanna, we were having a conversation about AI and how trying to bring people to a conversation about AI around subject relations is so hard, and people respond to it very, sometimes even aggressively. But then she said, "But mom, we can't do this to each other." Even treating another person as a subject is already very difficult. Imagine treating other species or other intelligences. But what you're saying, actually, what I'm hearing, is that we don't treat ourselves, our own bodies, as we treat our bodies as a meat sack, as you said before, and as an object. And unless we offer that kind of reference and respect for the sacredness of this miracle that is existence, that includes your own, but not through a pedestal, because that's the problem with that story we were talking about in the beginning. It creates a pedestal for humanity that then each individual assumes is needed for themselves to have a sense of worth in society, right? So if I'm not in a pedestal, I'm not a subject. And therefore you have this pedestal-like agency. I need to be doing something to feel that I have some purpose or some worth. And if I'm not doing anything, if I'm just resting, if you're an activist, you probably understand, like you will feel indulgent, like there's so much suffering. And I cannot let my body rest, because that would be like disloyal even to the work. Whereas other people would say, I just need to give my body the rest because I deserve it because of my pedestal. So we keep on comparing these things rather than actually saying, look, I need to be still for some time so that I can be in touch with the trillion, like apparently it's around 30 trillion cells that we are. So we are an ecology of 30 trillion cells, and then multiply it by molecules and mitochondria and everything else. There's so many beings in our cells, and we present as one body or one person, right? But we are a system presenting as a person. So we need to figure out how to be still, to be able to listen to that. And that the whole community of 30 trillion cells needs to be still to be able to see the ecology where they are embedded in, because they are embedded in like nested ecologies of other other trillions and trillions of other cells, so that we can attune to each other, right? And create a kind of communication. But if we are only treating it as objects, or if we treat ourselves as objects, in the old story that is expiring, that communication, that attunement is impossible, because we're trying to fix. We're not really paying attention to the movement of things and to the movement of who we are too. Because what we are is not static. Number one, we are aging. That system is shifting. And not only are we aging, we only exist in relation. So the person I am right now is in relationship to you, Rachel, and the person you are is in relationship to me. And this, if we are treating each other as subjects, we are relating through the indeterminacy of who you are and who I am. And yes, there is a story of who Vanessa is and who Rachel is, but that's a fiction. The embodied manifestation of both Vanessa and Rachel is something else completely that we ourselves cannot even fathom with the social constructs we have inherited. So what's interesting to me is that this openness to becoming is always a becoming in relation to, and how I'm becoming a little bit Rachel, you're becoming a bit Vanessa, right? And we are taking these pieces and resonances and vibrations into other ecologies, and this is changing. Maybe it's definitely changing the neurobiology of things and even the genetic expression of things in these interactions that are not only what is registered by our conscious mind. So what we perceive, like even what we say is a fraction of what we think. What we think is a fraction of what we perceive that is in front of us. What we perceive in front of us is a fraction of what exists. And we do believe that our stories can encompass everything. This is absolutely insane. And we still, the spell of it, right? And how we've been conditioned to believe that like somebody that looks a certain part will have the answers, will have, and then we believe that whoever has the analysis also has the way forward, right? And we are looking for who to put in that pedestal that will save us right now,
No.
where when actually maybe the only sane thing to do, the only would be to compost that pedestal, compost even the idea of sanity and insanity, and bring it down to the earth and learn to be together with each other and all the other beings to feel the pain, so that we can be guided by this, um, like it's a different kind of knowledge, but by this resonance. In my work with indigenous people, especially in the Amazon, like I've asked continuously, how do you know what to do? Right? And they say, well, we go into ceremony and we ask the land. Like when there's a drought, when there's a fire, like when we've managed to survive. And the land doesn't speak in this way of storying, right? It's not like let's call the land and see where do we go or something like that. It's a whole discipline of and of interpretation, of resonance and attunement with the land, and responsibility and reciprocity that needs to be happening, that makes it possible for the land to dream through you, for you to be designed by the land, for you to be led by the land, right? And not led by some ego on a pedestal wanting to do something to feel worthy or to receive some validation or to have their analysis affirmed. But like, what is it that we're doing? Including, like I've been saying this too, in relationship to books and podcasts. And I have a new book coming out, so take it with a pinch of salt. But I'm thinking about like by next year, to take a step back from public life, to be in this stillness. Because what I'm seeing is that people are reading books, going to workshops, and listening to podcasts, but sometimes it becomes deferral of actually being still
Yeah.
and doing the work.
Yeah.
So it's consuming, right? So I listen to this
Yeah.
one and I intellectualize it. I think I tick that box, and I go to another one and another one and another one. Yes, it's important to be informed, but right now, I think the work, especially right now that we are on the brink, the work is different, right? We need to digest. There's a huge constipation of information. We need contained diarrhea to be able to put it back to the land and allow things to compost and for new soil to be created. And we need to do this together, right? And it's hard when what you're waiting for is just another person to have the answers for you.
I had a really interesting experience, Vanessa, in the Amazon recently myself with an indigenous community. I was in ceremony with them. And I had a really uncomfortable ceremony because, beforehand I was like, this is it. I'm here. I'm with you. Hi, great. Like, I can't wait to, in my head, I was like, I can't wait to speak to you, land, forest. I'm so looking forward to this. And actually, the entire ceremony was me running around the forest in my head, shouting, "They're coming! They're coming! They're coming! What are you doing? We have to get ready! They're coming!" And being met with, I still don't have the word for it. It definitely wasn't apathy, but it was this sense of like, and what do you expect us to, we know, and there's a limit to what we can do. And I really thought when I was like, maybe I'll get the answer, and I knew it was silly. I knew it was silly because I really don't believe that, but some part of me was still holding on. And then I came out of it and I was like, no, nobody has the answer. There is no one answer. There is no even grand design. There is no like God in the sense of inevitability and constructionism and all of this. There's just like, there's God in the sense that we're alive and life is moving through us and life is moving towards complexity. And I do believe that life is becoming aware of herself more and more and more. But that doesn't mean that she has some kind of plan or that the indigenous elders have some kind of like huge, book of knowledge that they're just hiding from us for the moment until we be like, no, that's not what this is. And even actually it was really interesting being with that community because they are obviously incredibly ecological. They only came into contact with the outside world 60 years ago. That's how new this all is in a sense for them. And it was the most also patriarchal society I've ever been in, with the women, until very recently it was child brides. And it's still polygamy and women wanting voices politically is, they're coming round to it, but they don't really like it. And when it was me that got up to introduce myself to the wider community and not my partner, a lot of them didn't really like that either.
Didn't really end very well.
Yeah, it didn't like, yeah. So it was still this really interesting perspective of like, oh, people can have the answers about some bits of it and I have the answers about other bits of it and all this kind of stuff. But this like romanticization that someone somewhere has everything because they're close to nature. It gives this kind of godlike intelligence to what is actually just like the beauty and wonder of complexity. But we're going to have to figure out what to do in our own backyard, quite frankly. Like, there's no way of getting out of the accountability that this situation demands.
Agreed. And there is a violence also in placing people on a pedestal.
Totally.
And romanticizing and idealizing. And I've seen it, like I've been working in this area with indigenous communities for a long time. And if your motivation is associated with that idealization and romanticization, the moment you see the complexities you saw, that motivation goes away. And that has implications for the community.
Sure,
right?
exactly.
Who can't live up to the idealization of others, but also who might interpret the the contact and the engagement in very different ways too. So I've seen so much happening when these relationships are established in this way that it broke my heart. Sometimes it was very difficult to watch, but it comes back. It emerges from this consumptive way, right? Of let's find who has the the answers, whoever is hiding the answers from us, or yeah.
Yeah, someone's hiding them.
And at the same time, like there is this sense. So if you consume it, it's one thing, but then there is a like one way to interpret this opening into um, different storyings of the world and relationships with the rest of nature. Um, if you allow that to undo you, right? Instead of consuming it, you allow that to metabolize, including the complexity of it, right? Including that metabolization, there is an opening that happens for you to relate differently and lose the satisfaction you have with trying to find the answers. So I think part of that might have happened with you in terms of being frustrated and disappointed and maybe disillusioned with the part of you that was actually looking for that, right? So if you in that composting, is that the opening for and then and again you go back to, and I do too, go back to answers. So if there is an answer or there isn't an answer, because there isn't an answer is also an answer.
Yeah, sure.
Now, how do we bring it back to we don't freaking know?
Yeah, exactly.
And we
Exactly.
stay there because that opens up the possibility that there is indeterminacy, but it's lived, right? That indeterminacy, that motion, that movement, that mystery opens up a possibility of relations that is not there if you're looking for certainty
Yeah.
in either knowing or determining that it cannot be known, right? So there is a sense of thinking the universe, it's life, its complexity, its beauty, and its ugliness, and its brokenness, and its like messiness, and I'm part of it. And it's absurd, and there's coherence, and in islands, and maybe something that I cannot see. And what is bringing me into this tumbling or mulching of the mulch of everything um, is a curiosity, right? Of what is it like, and if you start to see life through that lens, and I know that some people would say, oh, no, but if you are being bulldozed by colonialism, you can't do that because, or if you are being targeted for genocide, you can't do that. It was actually with people who had been targeted by genocide that I saw this happening. When you have to face mortality, not as something that you have control over, right? Right now you have a target on your back. These were the people for whom that sense, that thread of life was most alive, right? Because like it's not a matter like the priorities shift basically in terms of being alive. And I've also seen the opposite of that. I'm not saying that it's not in no way a universalizing way. I've seen people too in the same spot saying, I just want to die because it is too much, right? But there's something that happens when you face the indeterminacy and the mortality together, and which is something that maybe more of us will have to face, that maybe we will have to face as a species, right? There's something that happens that opens another line of sight, or in of sense, in the sense of embodied sense, that allows for different kinds of relationship to be woven. But if all our incentives are about survival in a hierarchical, extractive, exploitative system of subject-object relationships, like it's much more difficult. It's only when this system is disintegrating that other possibilities also emerge. And most people will want to go back to the security that that system provided before. And I see that in movements too. So I see, it's so interesting to see that the institutions, the grants writing, grants dispensing, sorry, not grants, rights dispensing institutions that are being attacked and dismantled right now, that were like the basis of the shiny side of modernity. Like, so let's say the humanitarian side of modernity was the story that we kept telling ourselves of saving lives and extending lifespans and things like that, that actually secured the possibility of all the violence that was always systemically and historically and structurally inflicted, right? So it said, well, this, if the violence is collateral damage, at least what we're doing is over here.
Yeah.
So this humanitarian phase is no longer viable, right? So people still appeal to that. So our social movements are still using the same strategies that they used when modernity was stable, by appealing to institutions to uphold rights and humanitarian thinking. However, the institutions themselves have been eroded, and
Yeah.
but we keep doing the same thing. You see what I mean? Like it becomes
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's not doing what it's supposed to do,
Yeah.
but we don't know what else to do, so we just keep doing what used to work before, and we don't know what else, right? I think a little bit is the same thing with information. Like we look for more information, somebody will have the answers, either the indigenous elders or the black elders, or the experts, or a government that promises to bring greatness back again.
Yeah.
And we
Exactly.
don't see what's happening behind it.
I think there's such an interesting, how do I put this? I've been thinking about it so much recently, and I'm speaking about it as well on the show a little bit. This kind of difference between the things that are made of stories, like institutions or political movements, that are also, funded and supplied with energy and materials and all of this kind of thing. But then how, when we identify with or get involved with these things, we forget our own body, in a sense. So rather than um, actually doing something in the community where we live that is an act of, say, uh, feminism or anti-racism or, queer liberation or ecological regeneration, rather than doing it, we appeal. We ask permission, because that's what the movement demands of us. Like, to become part of a movement, it's almost like you give your mind, in a sense, to it, and you leave your body behind. There's all these tensions here that I'm trying to like work out recently, including how non-violence as a movement fits into all of this. And those institutions that we're appealing to, I mean, they can't respond anymore, right? Because they're no longer of that story. Like, they have gone back to strong man. This is a government and an institution that is made of things. It is made of bones and blood and flesh, and the literal deportation of bodies and the chopping down of trees and the grabbing of land and the extraction of more and more oil. Like, these are
Baby drill,
material
yeah.
things now. Yeah, drill, baby, drill. Like, that's a material politics that's happening. And that's what fascism is. It's a material politics. The politics of the past, 30 years is not going to apply to that, because that's been a politics that's been mostly privileged by it, happening in town halls rather than out on the streets.
Yeah. And that kind of pedestal pedestal politics or pedestal agency required a lot of visibility, which
Yeah.
will work counterintuitively and counter to the movement in this new reality, right? So I was in another podcast with Kumi Naidu a couple of days ago, and talking about activism for young people. What are the lessons of vets have learned in this? But some of the lessons are really important, the existential ones. But in terms of strategy, we're in completely new territory
Yeah.
in a sense, old for in another sense, new in the tech sense, the level of surveillance and how your visibility now becomes a liability, right? So um, and then processing all of this and offering something that could be of use to other generations it also becomes a problem. We also don't know everything that is needed, right? How this surveillance algorithmic surveillance is going to target movement. We are seeing it unfold in real time, and how it's becoming more and more effective in targeting, right? But those conversations, I think, are important. But they are important also. It's important. What we talked about was the humility that is important for the vets and for the young people. Everybody get off the pedestal, right? And sit and use the precious time we have left together for the things that really matter, which are not about validation of egos, right?
Yes.
Or the good old times, because we don't have any more time for that. I think we went through a period where difference was extremely important to be asserted, but it also surfaced the complexities of how it's also a tool of separation, right? Depending on how politics of difference happens, it can have the opposite effect of what it is intended, and especially if it is co-opted by the market of diversity, then we are set against each other, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't help in the time where the market is crashing and modernity is falling apart.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out what we don't have time for anymore. And part of it needs to get us to the understanding of that right now like there's a question, when are we? And this is one of the most important questions. The second important question is, where are we? And what are the possibilities around us? And the third question is, what do we do at the end of the world as we know it,
Yeah.
right? It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, period. It's the end of the world as we know it. And then get to a point, and again, that was a conversation with Ayana Young, where we talked about, like, we need to get to the point where we say, you're not bad, I'm not good. And right now we have to figure out what to do at this point in time when things are collapsing. If we can't get there, this old expired ways of asserting entitlements are going to get to hijack all the space and time we have,
Yeah.
right? When
Like a,
the house is already on fire.
the house is already on fire. The house is already on fire, and we're still having debates about who gets to hold the microphone, essentially, rather than like how are we running out the door to get there, and can I take you by the hand, and who needs lifted, who can we
Yeah,
carry?
exactly. When we need an escape route from a kind of controlled exit, we are still discussing who gets the throne.
Yeah.
And the throne is a toilet made of plastic.
I love that. Oh, I think this is so important, and this is. Oh, I love conversations like these that kind of draw constellations between things, and then you start to feel them at home in yourself. Like I've found since January, when that first day of executive orders were signed. And don't get me wrong, I do not think that the United States is the center of the world, but certainly it impacts a huge amount of the world more than most other nations. I immediately just felt the need to like, okay, pull back. Like, we know what is happening. We know what he's doing. We actually have known this for a while. It's been
Mm-hmm.
written about. I don't need to read 30 different people's analysis of what's going on every day. I certainly don't need 100 people's opinions of what's going on. In fact, I don't really need, the Western mind to attempt to show off some vague sense of control by making sense of whatever is happening. Like, I just need to pull back and try and dare take the time to figure out what to do next and who I do that with. And I've been amazed at kind of like the uptick in information that is being poured out of like mouth holes everywhere, it seems. And coupled with for now, like the lack of direct action. Where were, for all of like the British columnists writing about Donald Trump, where were the Brits on the street when he came to visit, protesting his visit? Where are the armies of liberation out on the streets of the United States? Or I'm sure that there are pockets happening in mutual aid network, but like, I think we have to recognize that this wording that we do of the world is yet another comfort blanket of control, as you were speaking to. And quite frankly, it's like the lowest effort thing to do as well. And I say that as somebody who does this for a living, like I continue to do it because I think I do pretty good work and it's valuable. But at the end of the day, it's not as valuable as the people who are creating the mutual aid networks and growing the food and and all this kind of stuff. And I deeply feel the call in myself to also to find where I'm going to do that too, because to continue pretending as if we're all living in this castle on a cloud, and if we can just find the right words, then that to take us right back to the beginning of this conversation, then all of a sudden, the veil will fall and the plan will be revealed, and we'll all essentially, it's like, oh, we'll all get entry into heaven. It's this continuing like Judeo-Christian madness essentially that is driving so much of the conversation, I feel, still today.
The scripture, yeah.
This is the scripture and the rapture,
Exactly. All in the scripture.
Oh, yeah. Vanessa, I could speak to you all day, but I know that we've run out of time essentially, and I'm so grateful to you. So let me skip ahead to my final question, which is, who would you like to platform?
It's a big question because it in English or in other languages, I feel that there would be so many people who I know who would be amazing, but they speak Portuguese, English. No, they don't speak English actually. Portuguese, Spanish. So there's a list there, including Mateus Tremembé, Tiffany Navarro Nicui, Nadia Pitaguari, Adriana Tremembé, Mama Maria Yara Querar. These are people who would speak to the place where the United States is not the center, but it's a huge force coming to them, right? But there's also people who I think speak English and need to be platformed more, like especially in the meta crisis conversations. I think we need to hear from women.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
We need more.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So I've been in conversation with some of them. Olivia Lazard is
She's
one
great.
of them.
Yeah.
Amazing. There's also Samantha Sweetwater. I've been in conversations in several inquiries where there's a different texture of sensibility there coming around the meta crisis. There's also Luisa Zondo, who is Kumi Naidu's wife, and brings in a very different sensibility, I think, to the conversation from South Africa, and also through the experiences of being a mother of Ricky Rick, who was a rapper who died by suicide 2 years ago, and yeah, there are more. More women who have different kinds of analysis, right? Liana Sananda also is somebody that can speak to not only the meta crisis, but the psychedelic renaissance, and how ideas that started from indigenous people working with sacred plants then got into the West as a form of perhaps trauma treatment, and are now being held by the right and the far right, even, right? So there is a messianic entrapment in in this kind of work that I think we need to talk about, and we need to bring the people who have seen the arc of where this went, and can speak to that. So those who have had the frustrating, heart-wrenching, and heartbreaking experiences of trying something as activists or as women trying to intervene or to lead, and have been met with not open cultures that are not open to that, we need to hear from that. Also, we need to hear from that because we have internalized, women internalizes these things, and we tend to do them the same to other women. So we need to interrupt that spell and bring ourselves together, because I think if we see this moment as a moment of birth of whatever it is that is being born, as midwives and as birth doulas, we need to coordinate very differently to protect this baby and the family of the baby, even if the family is violent, right? Especially if the family is violent. And figuring it out alone is an impossible task. We will need a community, but in not only of human beings, to figure out what to do at this time. So more women and more people who are not from English-speaking countries.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something I think about all the time, the privilege of being able to speak to so many people because of having this as my native language, and then the profound awareness that it's, well, I was about to say it's not enough to do it in English, but I certainly hope that there is, planète critiquelle in French and Spanish and Portuguese, and that like you said, we don't have to do it all by ourselves. So anyone out there who has the capacity and wants to speak to any of the people that you platformed as well in their native language, go and do it. And also, I'll just publish it on Planet Critical if you don't have your own podcast. So please, there you go. Vanessa, thank you so much for this. This was a really extraordinary conversation, and I've so enjoyed it. And I encourage everybody to go and read your work, Back to Front and Upside Down.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and thank you for keeping this as an inquiry rather than a problem-solving exercise. That is a difference, and I think part of the difference is instead of doing to, we are being with each other and with the questions rather than trying to solve something. So thank you for keeping the spirit of inquiry in our conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope we get to do it again someday.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more, I've put links to everything in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and share the episode if you enjoyed it. To support the show, subscribe at planetcritical.com, where you can read the weekly newsletter. You can also become a Planet Critical patron. All links are in the description box below. As always, my deepest thanks to that community. Planet Critical wouldn't exist without your support. Thank you everyone for listening and for coming on this journey together.